All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our August National Network call. I'm Nikisha Ricks Pettyjohn, and I'm a director of our national network. And I want to thank you all for making the time to join us today. Um, I do think today's conversation gives us a really good mix of both what's happening right now across the federal policy landscape and some of the bigger questions that we've been thinking about as we look for the future. I do want to say that this call is being recorded, and the recording and the slides will be shared with all registered attendees. All right, so what are we going to tackle today? Today, we'll start from hearing from our Business Leaders United network and some special guests as they take a look into their latest brief pertaining to Workforce Pell and what we're hearing from the employer perspective. Then I'll spend a little time with you updating on our new Promise of Work initiative, where we've been since we last talked with the network, some observations that we've been seeing in some of these engagement opportunities across the country, and where we'll be taking the work as it leads up to our 2027 Skills Summit. And then we'll wrap up with our federal updates from Megan and Caroline, where they'll share the latest of what's happening on the Hill. With that, I'm going to pass it over to the Director of Business Leaders United, Jeff, to begin the conversation.
Hello and welcome everyone to this call. We really appreciate you taking the time to join this discussion about some issues that we feel are extremely important. So I'm really excited to be joined by two members from the business community who have been working in their states to advance Workforce Pell. NSC has advocated for an expansion of Pell to more short-term skills training programs for a long time. And now that it's here, we of course want it to be successfully implemented in states. We want individuals to have more access to skills training that leads to a good job. And we also want employers to see more sustained growth too. A key piece of this is going to be engaging employers. So Blue put together an explainer for employers so that they understand what Workforce Pell is. Now, we know that realizing the full potential of Workforce Pell is going to take some time. But some folks in the blue space have already begun to tackle implementation and employer engagement in their state. So I'm excited, as I said, to be joined by Ingrid Stegemeller from the Washington Business Roundtable and Dan Peterson from the Cook Group, which is a manufacturing company based in Indiana, but has operations around the world. So Ingrid and Dan, welcome to our network call. Now I cannot see, but I'm sure that you both are on camera and off mute at this point. I want to start this discussion to kick it back to you to tell us the work that you do and how you are supporting implementation of Workforce Pell and employer engagement in both Washington State and Indiana. Ingrid, let's kick it over to you first.
Sure. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. My name is Ingrid Stegemiller. I'm the Industry Engagement Director for the Washington Roundtable, which is a board of senior vice presidents and executives from our state's largest employers. And in my role, I focus on both helping employers understand and reap value from early talent development. And I also focus on systems change that improves employer leadership in workforce development. So the roundtable worked with our state's labor council to convene a structured stakeholder process with the governor's office to develop joint industry recommendations for Workforce Pell implementation here in the state. We had 20 some employers, 20 labor leaders, about 10 different sector-based organizations across 9 sectors who came together for a 3-phase process earlier this year around initial design input, some more detailed choices, and then signing off on the recommendations that we submitted to the governor's office in May. So I will put a link to those in the chat if folks want to see them. I would say the most substantive recommendation from the employer community that the labor community was also supportive of was about the employer validation process and creating a more structured, repeatable, sector-based process that significantly augments our state's labor market data with more forward-looking information, namely around employer hiring behavior. So there's a significant section about that in the recommendations, and happy to add more down later in the discussion.
Great, Dan. So you have done some similar work at the statewide level in Indiana. Can you just tell us a little bit about the work that you do and the work that you've done with the state of Indiana too?
Sure, yeah, and like Ingrid had said, thank you very much for having me here. I look forward to the conversation. I've appreciated some work with Blue previously with Jeff and the team, off and on over the last few years, related to advocacy around Workforce Pell and other obviously skills-based approaches to talent development, if you will. So let me set the context for my activities in Indiana. Number one, I'm a workforce guy. I'm an employer guy. So I come from, as Jeff mentioned, I come from a company called Cook Medical, which is a large 10,000 employee, privately held, minimally invasive medical device company based in Bloomington, Indiana, but with locations all across the globe. And for a long time, Cook has been focused on talent development, both talent development that we can attract in and retain in our company, but also continued talent development of our folks within the company to help them go as far as they want. So we've been leaning into a lot of work internally to help provide opportunities for continuous learning and skill development and advancement through any number of things. I've had for the last 14, I think, or almost 15 years, I had the pleasure of serving on the Indiana Commission for Higher Education, which is a government, quasi-government organization that advises the state and legislature around the operation of public higher ed institutions in Indiana and has statutory responsibility for a number of those things. So I've been on that commission for a long time and have chaired it now for a number of times, actually a couple times over the years, but currently the chair again for a couple of years. And under this work through the Indiana Commission for Higher Education, they are the group that has been responsible for, with partners at Department of Workforce Development and others, to bring forth Workforce Pell to Indiana, and was happy to hear that Workforce Pell, Indiana was the second state to be approved here with programs targeted to Workforce Pell. So first one, I think, is through the way Indiana's doing it is doing it in a rolled out way, and very with the intent of develop what they're going to bring forth is want to make sure it's a very high quality, high fidelity to what the opportunity is. So trying to really pilot that in the right way and then scale it rapidly after that, working with the two-year program universities within Indiana. One, Ivy Tech Community College, which is a single articulated statewide community college system in Indiana. Their program for medical assistants was the first program approved just here recently. And then our other public institution, Vincennes University, which is primarily a two-year program, very much more technically focused, and also one of the pilot partners. So it's up and running, just now up and running with the first program. So we're excited about seeing that. I'm not an expert in workforce development issues, and even though I'm on the commission and engage in it in that regard, I am really more from the industry side of things, the business side of things. So happy to help reflect on perspectives from that as well.
So Dan and Ingrid, Dan, I'm really glad that you brought up that last point. One of the key ingredients to a successful workforce pal. So we have more than 200 folks on this call. A lot of them do not come from the business space. Um, they come from the ed space, the training space, the support space for individuals. Um, and people are going to begin to think about, and to be honest, not just for Workforce Pell, but for a range of other things. How do we engage employers around these things? And so, as you think about, as you've been approached, as you've been engaged by folks, as you are someone, Ingrid too, um, who understands the business side a little bit more, might not understand the workforce development side as much. Um, how would you suggest that groups engage employers around workforce Pell or around skills training in general? What should they consider as they pitch things to a business? Dan, let's go with you first, and then Ingrid, let's go with you next.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. It's relevant in so many of these things that we're dealing with around the next generation and talent and that sort of thing, whether it be internships, apprenticeships, workforce Pell, all these different things where you need employers to engage. I guess from my experience, um, the big challenge I see to get any kind of scale to some of these workforce engaged efforts is that a lot of the companies, and this is, I'm reflecting my experience in Indiana, but a lot of the companies that you need to get involved are smaller and mid-sized companies. They're not the big players necessarily, even though they certainly can come to the table and do. You need more of the smaller and mid-sized companies to really engage in these things if you're going to scale it across the geography of what you're trying to accomplish or across the sector that you're trying to impact, et cetera. So, you know, what I see is a lot of business owners, business leaders, managers who say, yeah, I really want to engage in this. I would love to be a part of this. I recognize that I need the talent. I need people that are prepared and prepared to then continue to grow in their role. But I don't have the bandwidth. I don't have a HR talent development team. I don't have all the resources, and I'm still trying to get product out the door. And so it's not typically the lack of desire to get involved. It's both having the bandwidth and then understanding how best to provide input to the effort, if you will. And I think helping employers on the second part of that by helping them understand, well, here are the specific things that would be helpful for us to help you help us co-develop a program to co-develop talent. Here's what would be really helpful from you as the business to help us make sure we develop it in the right ways, the specific jobs that are most in need, the specific skills that are needed, et cetera, et cetera. And I think with Workforce Pell, you've got an advantage to some degree in being able to use that as a model to do this because, you know, it's one thing where you ask an employer to get involved in helping to develop a curricular program around some kind of broader area of focus. But when you're talking Workforce Pell, you as an employer have the opportunity potentially to help ensure that you're developing a specific program that will immediately or, realistically have a tangible benefit to you as a company. Not 20 years from now, but maybe more in the near term. So those would be my reflections on it.
Great. Thanks, Dan. Ingrid, you sit in a somewhat different position in that you do not work for an employer specifically, but you sort of work in this intermediary space in some ways. Same thoughts here. How would you suggest that folks engage employers, or how do you engage employers in the work that you do?
Yeah, I agree completely with everything Dan said. So, plus one there. And I would add 2 points. I think first, I hear a lot from employers that they, as Dan said, they want to engage, they want to be involved, but they often get asks that either are unrealistic on bandwidth, they're unaligned with business need, or they're coming from a place of kind of public system, education system, workforce system jargon, and it's unclear exactly what the ask is. So I can share this too. I put together a piece that's like kind of showing the overlap. We have really similar goals around talent in the employer community and the education space. We just talk about them differently. So I do think it's helpful when education and workforce stakeholders can approach businesses speaking business language a little bit more, and understanding that programs, early talent programs, career connected learning programs, whatever you want to call them, they to be sustainable in the long term, they also need to meet a business need. And I think that's relatively easy to do. But I think having that lens, I think for education and workforce stakeholders to have that lens going into conversations with employers is really helpful. The other piece I would say is I just finished a research project here mapping all the different touch points we could find where education and workforce systems interact with employers in our state. And what we found is an extremely high volume. We found 76 different types of touch points, and we're roughly estimating that adds up to about almost 3,000 standing tables around the state of employers and education and workforce stakeholders. So we're trying to think about recommendations to both decrease the workload on everybody that requires, and to level up the signal that employers are able to provide at a state level around jobs and skills demands. And so one of the structural elements that we're looking at is some statewide employer intermediaries that could help be that liaison between education and workforce providers and employers. They have that baked in trust and relationship with employers. They can kind of do that language translation. They can provide some of that backbone admin support through the employer lens. We also, I will say, saw Workforce Pell as an opportunity to think about some of that infrastructure, the piece around employer validation, and what would kind of a sector-based model look like for employer validation for Workforce Pell, and can that open the door to some broader conversations in our state about streamlining, aligning, coordinating our resources to make that connection between employers and education and workforce systems a little smoother.
Yeah, Ingrid, I'm not sure you're ready to share it yet. I'm not sure it's in a public space yet, but I've seen some of that touch points work, and it is very, very interesting. Hits on a lot of key things that I've seen in my work, that when a business does not understand an issue a lot in multiple groups approach them on something, they tend to throw up their hands and just say, I don't understand this work. I'm going to take a step back. So I've really loved seeing that work specifically. And we can make sure that it gets passed around if it's live now or when it becomes live. I want to kind of talk a little bit, and this might be answering the same question. So if it is, then let me know. But Ingrid, as you think about engaging businesses in this work, how are you pitching Workforce Pell? Um, for some of us, it can be confusing about exactly what it is for those who even work in this space. But for a business, and when we think about the jargon side of this work and what Workforce Pell is, we really need to simplify how we discuss this with employers. So how do you and your work plan to pitch this to employers specifically?
Yeah, I think we do have the luxury in this state of having a handful of high demand sector organizations that believe in workforce development, have that capacity, and they are really powerful partners, I think, in engaging their member businesses. And I think the pitch really is that this is the first time, and as you all know better than I do, it's the first time in Pell Grants history that it can be used for these short-term training programs. So now's the time to get engaged and shape what those eligible programs look like for a system that's going to run for a long time. So get in now, tell the state what you need, like what makes what, you know, what skills you need, what a successful program looks like for your sector, and then you're going to set yourself up for this longer term training pipeline long into the future. And so we've tried to pitch it in that way, and I think it's I'm also I think I've tried to share that lens with our public partners because I think that there's a real moment to help make employers aware that this opportunity exists. Like, I'll just give a for example. We have a growing life sciences industry here. Lab techs are in high demand. We have an awesome short-term lab tech training program. We need employers to be aware of that program and to tap into it. But so from the public partners perspective, if our employers aren't aware of this opportunity, we're missing out on a real opportunity to use employers' need and voice to drive enrollment in these programs and usage of Workforce Pell. So I think that's another opportunity too among employers is like, look, especially those whose industries who have short-term credentials that map into their industries, like this is almost like a recruitment opportunity for you. Like here's this financial aid opportunity that you can trumpet to whatever recruitment pools you're using and get people into these programs to build your own talent pool. So a couple different, I think, takes on that question.
Great, thank you. So this time always goes fast. I always wish we had a lot more time. Dan, final question for you here. Um, in Indiana, and really in every state, states are going to need employer input, as Ingrid said, to determine what the hiring needs are of employers and what credentials are recognized in industries. How is Indiana thinking about trying to get that input in that info?
Yeah, great question, and obviously a critically important issue for sure to make sure things are aligned as well as possible. So, we're doing it in a couple different ways. I would say the simplest way that I would describe, and I think the most effective, and Ingrid mentioned it, it is through sector-focused organizations. Not every business sector and industry sector has its own sector organization, but in Indiana, as an example, we've got an organization that represents the advanced manufacturing sector as a whole across the state, and that organization, and like organizations for life sciences and other in particular some of those in demand industry sectors can really be helpful in pulling the right information and in helping to be that bridge to help translate from the workforce provider and the education group what exactly do they need from industry to make sure they're talking the same language and talking around the specifics around skills and the specifics around credentials. Not every industry sector has the same view of credentials, if you will, that others do. So that's why the sector specific approach seems to help pave the way so that you're not having to have the same types of base setting conversations with every specific employer you're trying to get with. So I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's kind of where my head is around it.
Yes, it does. And you finish at the exact right time. Dan and Ingrid, we really appreciate both of your time to join us. I'm putting in the chat right now the link to our business explainer on Workforce Pell. This is not state specific. Please use this brief for any employers, any employer groups that you engage. If people want more insight and info about Workforce Pell, let's give Dan and Ingrid a virtual round of applause. And Nikisha, I send it back to you.
All right. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you for facilitating that conversation, and thank you to our guests for providing that valuable perspective, especially as we celebrate the accomplishments and victories of achieving workforce pay. So now I want to go ahead and update us quickly on our new Promise of Work initiative. I also want to apologize that I'm having technology issues, that my camera is not on. It would not work, of course, on a day that I have a good hair day. If I had split ends everywhere, I'm sure I would be live and in color and 4K for everyone to see me. Um, so, if you remember from our last conversation in June, we introduced the new Promise of Work to this network, and we shared what we wanted, that we wanted to do something a little different. And when I say we, I'm speaking of NSC and its network. And so instead of beginning with a policy solutions as we envision on what a new promise of work could be, we wanted to begin with a question. What should the promise of work actually be? And we've been listening to people across different communities, sectors, and perspectives, not asking them to react to an NSE policy agenda, but giving and creating space for us and our partners to think bigger and think differently. And what has been interesting is that despite how different these conversations have been, we've been from LA to West Virginia, we're beginning to hear some remarkably consistent ideas of what people want this new promise of work, what they want from this new promise of work. And so, New Promise of Work has moved from an idea we were testing into a much bigger and larger national conversation. Again, we've been traveling, listening, asking questions, and most importantly, we've been self-checking ourselves as national partners to ensure that we're just not walking into these rooms assuming that we already know these answers. And so, at the heart of the new promise of work is a simple idea. Before we decide what needs to change and what needs to be different, we need to get clear about what we're actually trying to build. So again, instead of beginning with a particular program, a policy, or even the workforce system itself, we begin starting with the future. What do we want work to make possible for people? What should businesses be able to expect from our workforce investments? And what would have to be true for people, regardless of where they live or where they start, to have a real shot at economic opportunity? And that has taken us into conversation again across the country in various communities. And since we last updated you in June, we've been doing a lot of listening. So we've been having national conversations with national partners. We've been having in-person convenings. Hopefully, you've been seeing some of our interviews with some of our NSC network leaders during our site visits. These in-person sessions have ranged from various stakeholders, from community leaders, employers, workers, and practitioners themselves. And we're doing this all with the goal to listen before we prescribe anything. And I'm going to just share just some of the observations that I've been seeing. I will say that our research team is working to gather all the data from these in-person sessions and these virtual convenings to synthesize those and produce a product that will lead our work into the future. But I just want to give some perspectives and observations from just some of the opportunities that I've been able to attend. And so the first observation I like to share is a better future still feels possible despite the inconsistencies of what's happening on the ground and affecting workers. Across conversations, people are not just naming what's broken. There's been a willingness to imagine something better and bigger, and a belief that work can provide greater opportunity, stability, dignity, and mobility. So people aren't just asking how we can protect what we currently have. They're really asking us to imagine what could be better and bigger in the system. A second observation that I've been able to witness is everything is connected. So work doesn't happen in a vacuum. And I know I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but basic needs, benefits, education and training, technology, job quality, and economic security are all deeply connected. People experience these issues together, even when our policies and our systems are addressing them separately. And so, one of the tensions we're hearing is that our system often asks people to separate problems that are not separate in their actual lives. The last observation I would like to share is the future requires more than familiar solutions, and the next solution may not be a policy just yet. And so, attending these conversations, we've talked about AI, Workforce Pell, work-based learning opportunities, of course, the benefit cliffs, tax incentives, funding alignment, and better data, and all of those matter. But collectively, what I'm hearing is there's no single policy that will meet the promise. We're hearing a call to start with the future of what we want this work to look like and then work backwards rather than simply applying new solutions or policies to familiar problems that we have. And so, what's prompted us internally as a leadership group and as an organization is to take that question and add another layer. What future are we trying to create? But then, what policies, systems, investments, and behaviors we actually need to get us there? And so during some of our in-person sessions, we've been able to do some mental modeling. And a lot of the partners that are on the call today, I just want to thank you for being and participating in those as well. And so, where are we going, right? We're going a little deeper into our observations. So, we'll continue to listen, but we're moving from intentional listening into making meaning. And so, this fall, we'll start convening insight circles that'll allow us to go a little deeper into the themes that we receive from our research team. And these conversations that we're going to have with our insight circle are not meant to simply validate what we've already heard. We want to use that space to challenge us, right? To ask what's missing, who's missing, where the tensions lie in these possible opportunities, and what ideas could actually mean for the future of work and the promise. And so, to sum up what we've done in the short amount of time since last speaking to you, we started by asking people to imagine a new promise of work. This fall, we'll start beginning to ask what it would actually take for us to keep this promise we're trying to build. And so all this is going somewhere, right? Imagining to building. All roads are leading to 2027 Skills Summit. So we're building towards something. By the time we gather for our Skills Summit in March, that I hope each of you will be able to join, by that time we've spent several months listening across the country, digging into deeper conversations through our insight circles, challenging our assumptions with our network and our network leaders, and we'll start beginning and understand where the opportunity really lies for this new vision. And the summit gives us a chance to bring the conversation together collectively. I want to be clear and just say, I don't want you to think that when you come to the summit in March, that NSC is going to walk into a room and unveil the answers, right? I want you to think about our time in March as a moment where this network is helping NSC wrestle with what we're going to build together as a collective. And so I encourage you to save the date and join us at Capitol Hilton Hotel in Washington, D.C., March 3rd through the 5th. Early bird registration will open in October, so please ensure that you're signed up for our emails through our New Promise of Work initiative and NSC Network, and follow us on our social media channels, including LinkedIn. And then during this time, as we wait for early bird registration to open, I and encourage each of you to sit and think about one or two partners you would like to attend the summit with, right? In the words of John Lewis, a partner that you want to get in good trouble with, the necessary trouble, and redeem the soul of America together in DC. And so, with that, I want to pass it over to probably the most anticipated part of this call. We did this intentionally. Thank you guys for staying with us. We're going to give you some congressional updates, Megan and Caroline. I'll hand it over to you.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you so much, Nikisha, for sharing those insights about New Promise of Work. So exciting and also so wonderful to hear from Jeff and our partners about Workforce Pell. Just wanted to say hello to everyone on the call. It's so nice to see some familiar names and some new names as well. Hope everyone's having a good summer. I'm Caroline Drashida. I'm our Senior Government Affairs Manager at National Skills Coalition, and Megan and I are going to give some federal congressional updates, starting with some positive news I'm excited to share. So we have a positive update on the College Transparency Act, also known as CTA, which is a long-standing priority for National Skills Coalition and our network. So on July 30th, the Senate Help Committee marked up and advanced the College Transparency Act with overwhelming bipartisan support, which is so exciting to see. For some context on why we are seeing movement right now, the Help Committee Chairman, Bill Cassidy from Louisiana, recently lost his reelection bid and will be leaving the Senate at the end of this Congress. And CTA has been a long-standing priority for Senator Cassidy, so there is a significant interest in getting CTA across the finish line before he leaves Congress. So a bit of a legacy issue there. Just a reminder on what the College Transparency Act does, or maybe it's your first time hearing about it, but at its core, CTA is going to give students, families, policymakers, institutions, and businesses better information about what happens to students after they enroll in post-secondary education. So the bill would create a secure, privacy protected student level data network within the National Center for Education Statistics. And CTA is also especially important as states and institutions implement Workforce Pell. Workforce Pell is, of course, opening federal financial aid to many short-term programs for the first time. And again, CTA is going to give students, policymakers, and employers better program level information on outcomes like completion, earnings, employment, retention. And that data can help students identify programs that lead to good jobs while also helping policymakers ensure that public dollars are going to high quality career aligned programs. And the goal is really to fill some of the significant gaps in our current data system and give people more complete information about college access and costs and success and outcomes so that they can make better informed decisions. And we can go to the next slide. Um, CTA, as I mentioned, has been a long-standing priority for National Skills Coalition. It's a central part of our federal policy agenda. Many of you in our network have advocated for this legislation at this year's Skills Summit and at previous Skills Summit. So this markup represents real progress on something our network has been pushing for many years. I also wanted to highlight that NSC with our partners did a significant amount of advocacy leading up to the markup, including working to increase endorsements from national, state, and local organizations. And that advocacy was reflected during the markup at the end of July. Senator Cassidy specifically noted that more than 70 organizations had endorsed CTA and entered those endorsements into the official congressional record. So looking ahead about what might be next for CTA. So again, the good news is that CTA passed out of the Help Committee with overwhelming bipartisan support. And Senator Cassidy's staff is now assessing whether there is an opportunity to hotline the bill in the Senate. Hotlining is essentially a process for determining whether a bill can pass the Senate by unanimous consent without requiring a formal floor debate or a roll call vote. So we're continuing to watch closely and work with our partners to see if there's a path to getting CTA through the Senate before the end of this Congress. And then one final update from the same Help Committee markup that I was just discussing that I wanted to flag because I know many folks in our network are following this presidential administration's efforts to restructure and dismantle the Department of Education. So I thought it was important to highlight that during this markup, the committee also blocked a proposal that would transfer several special education programs from the Department of Education to the Department of Health and Human Services. So I wanted to highlight that because it's another example of Congress asserting its role in determining how federal education programs are structured and shows that the administration efforts to restructure the Department of Education are not necessarily being met with broad agreement, even with a Republican controlled Congress. And now I'll pass it to Megan to keep going with these updates.
Yes, thank you so much. Well, it's recess, so there isn't a ton happening right now, which is why we're talking about things that happened earlier this month or late last month between our last network call and now. I did want to take us back a couple of network calls ago, just to sort of give us a baseline of where we're starting. So, if you remember from a couple calls ago, the president's budget request was released. We went over that. That kicks off the congressional appropriations process. Um, and that president's budget request proposed the consolidation and elimination of several workforce and education programs. That took us to the House Appropriations Committee, which crafted its own appropriations bills, including one for the Departments of Labor, Health and Human Services, Education, and related agencies. And that legislation reflected a lot of the priorities in the president's budget request, including eliminating or making very large cuts to WIOA Youth and Adult, Reentry Employment Opportunities, or REO, the Senior Community Service Employment Program, Job Corps, and Adult Education. They were able to move their bill in the House. The Senate Appropriations Committee, which is intended to come up with its own set of bills in that chamber, was unable to reach top line agreements and did not move any of their appropriations bills. So, coming up on August recess, folks took a look at what the calendar looked like, and how, while September seems far away from maybe the end of July, in reality, once they came back from August recess, there were only 11 legislative days where both chambers were in session before the end of the fiscal year. So, seeing that, both chambers took to creating a continuing resolution. The House continuing resolution goes through December 4th. The Senate bill would run through December 11th, and that bill includes language preventing OMB from finalizing a concerning rulemaking that would allow political decision making in federal grants. NSC submitted some comments on that proposed rule, and I'll add a link in the comment section once I'm done speaking. But the main piece of that is because those two bills are different, passed in each chamber. When they get back from August recess, they're only going to have a couple weeks to iron out the differences and pass a identical continuing resolution, or a full year package, which is probably not going to happen at that point, or else shut down the government. It does not seem as though there's a lot of appetite to shut down the government only a few days, or rather a few weeks before the midterm elections. I don't think anyone is thinking that that's going to be helpful to their election prospects. But, we do run into some challenges with both the timeline and the political makeup of both chambers. Margins are tight in the House. You don't have the ability to bypass the filibuster with regular appropriations in the Senate. So you do need bipartisan support. And so most likely a CR is what we're going to see, whether that runs through December 4th, like the House bill, or December 11th, or some other time period past elections season is unclear at this point. But what it does mean is it gives our network time to weigh in on why these workforce and education programs are so important. Um, as you see, like we are seeing the president's budget request reflected in the House, as I mentioned, legislation. We want to make sure that those programs are preserved. We want to see more robust investments, especially as we're seeing AI and other technologies change the nature and landscape of work. And so NSC has a take action that we will be circulating, and I'll drop the link to that in the webinar chat as well. And we hope that you will share that. It is an individual action, it's not a sign-on letter. So anyone can take action and submit this letter or make changes to it to their members of Congress. And so we hope you will. With that, I think that is all of our updates. Caroline, correct me if you have anything further.
I just wanted to take a minute to let folks know Megan already outlined a lot of this, but National Skills Coalition has, of course, been advocating at the federal level for increased appropriations. We recently helped co-host a Capitol Hill briefing, which featured Diamond Grace, a member of our Voices for Skills Leadership Council, just talking about the importance of WIOA youth funding, which Megan outlined has previously been proposed to be cut. And so just want to put a reminder out there for everyone on the call, if you haven't connected with your congressional office since the summit, now is a great time to do it. And we've got some asks there: protect federal workforce investments, urge senators to support the College Transparency Act. And as always, we encourage you to share the local impact that further data funding and further federal workforce investments would have on your community. You all know that you're the real experts, that you have that local experience and perspective that congressional staff just don't have. So again, be sure to reconnect with your member of Congress if you haven't since the summit. Let them know what you're up to and your thoughts on appropriations and the College Transparency Act. And I think that's it for me, unless that spurred any final thoughts from you. Okay, great.
All right. Thank you, Megan and Caroline. I guess we can see if there are any questions. That will conclude the end of our updates for August. Um, I didn't see any in the chat. I seen one for Blue, but if you